Hello, everyone. I'm your host, Miles, and this is X-Raised, where knowledge meets inspiration in the intricate dance of industry evolution. We're welcoming back today someone who has become a familiar and very respected voice on the show. When someone keeps coming back to share insights with us, it usually means one thing. They're continuously bringing value to the conversation. He has spent more than 4 decades helping organizations and professionals improve performance, strengthen capability, and build cultures that truly value people. His work revolves around something very simple yet powerful, helping individuals understand their skills, competence, and professional development so they can grow with confidence. He's a strong advocate for accelerating continuous improvement, better known as ACI, and for building organizations where people development, engagement, and competence management are real systems that create value. Here's the Managing Director and CEO of ACI Global and e-Quip, joining us again, Ian Erskine. Hi, Ian.
And welcome again, Miles, and all our viewers. And yes, it's lovely to be back again. And yes, and you introduced very much what we're actually going to be talking about today, because in today's troubled world, it's becoming oh so important to get uh, the understanding and engagement from your employees.
Mhm.
And what we're going to demonstrate today is there's a very simple process to start that off. And yes, so we'll look at that. And again, welcome to our viewers. And I hope everyone had a wonderful weekend, enjoying their time with their families. And yes, so looking forward to this latest podcast.
Yes, let's do this. Thank you again for joining me, Ian. And this is something many people recognize from business strategy, SWOT analysis, but with a very interesting twist. Instead of looking at companies, we're looking at ourselves. How a personal SWOT analysis can help professionals and how that ties into continuous professional development, ISO personal certification, competence management, and ultimately building stronger organizations through stronger people. So, when people hear the term SWOT analysis, Ian, I think they usually think about business strategy or corporate planning. But at ACI Global, you're applying this concept at a very personal level. So, from your perspective, why is doing a personal SWOT analysis such a powerful starting point for professionals who want to truly understand their strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, especially as we talk about engagement in today's evolving workplace?
Well, I guess it all goes back to the adage where there has to be a starting point somewhere. And this is oh so important when we're talking about new employees joining an organization or even employees stepping up into a new role. And to properly determine this, we've got to look at capability. And as a starting point, we look at personal disciplines, culture, values, and personal goals. But here we also need to appreciate and have a clear understanding of chain of responsibility and duty of care. Now, this comes about very much during onboard and actually should start at the first interview that is being carried out by the employer or the managing director or the senior person within the organisation.
Mhm.
And it needs to be based around the person's personal strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Because if that's not understood at the very start, everything will start to become misconstrued. And
Mhm.
quite often, and I often give this example, and it happened during business operations where a young fellow actually tipped his prime mover over, and dangerously enough to bring to people's attention, the prime mover was carrying explosives, but luckily for not himself, but also the truck, but more important himself, he was safe. He ended up in hospital, but he was very, very upset and concerned. And I happened to be their consultant at the time.
I see.
And so I was called, and anyway, he happened to live over in Western Australia, which is a 3-hour flight. And anyway, the
Wow,
managing
far.
director called me and I said, "Oh no, I'm happy to hop on a flight." And he said, "Well, I hope you don't mind, but I've already booked you on the first flight out tomorrow morning." of which I did. So I flew out and I went straight to the hospital where the young fellow, I very quickly realised he was very clearly upset. And eventually he settled down and I said, okay, just tell me why and what actually happened. And he said, well, before the accident, I was stressed because we've just had a new bub. Uh, Mother had mastitis and couldn't feed the bub properly. I've been up all hours nursing and bottle feeding and so forth. I know I should not have come to work. And I looked at him and he said, well, it's great that you understand that. But, did anyone understand your predicament, having a new child? Oh, no, no, we tend to keep that to ourselves and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And anyway, so I said, well, okay, so let's get this out in the open so you can discuss it with your boss. And he sort of looked at me, no, no, I don't want to speak to you. I said, well, that's going to be a bit hard because he's just outside the door and he would like to speak to you. But anyway, the long story of the whole thing was that lack of understanding. Now, he was a strong employee, fully dedicated to his job, but also dedicated to his family, looking after his family, and things started to become adrift. He became extremely fatigued, right? And this
Mm-hmm.
is where this can come out when you're talking about a person's strengths, their weaknesses, their opportunities. And if you talk about opportunities, you would immediately say, "Oh yes, we've just got a new bub into the family, and our
Mm-hmm.
family's growing. How exciting it is! Brings enormous opportunities, but also can bring threats where people become fatigued, or things happen in the marriage, or the family bringing a child up. And this is where a SWOT is oh so important to be carried out at the very beginning of the employment."
Right. And that scenario, Ian, is on point. Sometimes we spend so much time analyzing the business or our work, our KPIs, that we forget to analyze ourselves. And when professionals start that self assessment, it really does create a clear picture of where they stand and where they could grow. So the next challenge is being honest with it. It's easy to say, I'm good at this, or I need to improve here, but I guess that can sometimes be based more on perception than reality. So, how can professionals realistically evaluate their capability, behavior, disciplines, and competence rather than just relying on perception? And how does that connect with structured frameworks like ISO, personal certification, and competence management?
Well, so I guess this is where we now begin to talk about task and skills verification, along with a formal documented competence framework in place. Now, the important thing to remember here is this must be ongoing. It can't be ad hoc. There's a need for a framework uh, to to be in place so that this can be done. And look, with modern technology, and again, I was talking to an organisation yesterday, and they have a factory where they repair valves and so forth. And I was so impressed. They came back to me and said, "No, we've now got a capability framework in place for every single person on every single machine."
Mhm.
And I then mentioned, I said, "Have you thought about how you verify that process?" And he looked at me and he said, well, do you have any suggestions? And of course, I've got to be a little bit careful as an auditor. But I said, yes. I said, look, modern technology, just have someone as the person is actually doing their job, fulfilling
Mhm.
their task. Just take a little video clip of them actually performing that task and or tasks, right? And the beauty of this is that not only do you end up with a verification of those skills, which can ultimately assist you if something happens down the future. Now, this is
Uh-huh.
where I often bring in, and it's very important to remember, we are all human and we all tend to make mistakes. But the
Right.
most important thing is for not only the employer but the employee is you have to cover yourself in these situations. So if something seriously happens, right, you have to be an ability where you can stand in front of the judge and say, look, Your Honour, there's a there's a copy and evidence of our ongoing skills variation of Joe throughout the last 6 months, right?
Mhm.
Now, we were unable to depict that something seriously had happened, or it could have just been a mental lapse and something happened, but we didn't pick that up. But over the last 6 months, there's our ability to demonstrate his skills in doing his job. Now, the judge ultimately will look at that person and say, that's fine, let's move to the next person we're discussing this. And ultimately, it could be a completely unforeseeable risk that happened, right?
Mhm.
But it still has to be catered for by the organisation in one shape or form.
Mhm. Having a structured approach really helps remove some of the guesswork, and it shifts the conversation from what do I think I'm good at to what have I actually demonstrated through, as you said, skills, tasks, and verified competence. And that naturally leads us to the next step, Ian, accelerating continuous improvement, or ACI. It's a way to turn awareness into real progress. So, once someone completes a meaningful SWOT analysis, how does that insight actually feed into continuous professional development, or CPD, and the journey towards things like ACI Global certification or even ISO personal recertification?
Well, again, this leads directly to what I was talking about just then in reference to the company I was auditing. And look, most organisations have an appraisal process in place where
Mhm.
on an annual or biannual, or even, every second year or so, they carry out an appraisal on the employee. But I often find this is a very ad hoc process. So I take organisations back to that actual process, and at the very start, I say, okay, so when you're doing your appraisal of your employee, is it just you asking the questions about how he or she is performing, or do you actually involve yourself where you encourage the employee to ask you yourself as the senior manager or the owner of the business how they feel you are performing? So it becomes a 360-degree process, right?
Mhm.
Now, we'll get onto this in a couple of weeks' time, right? But what I'm trying to demonstrate here is this is where it actually all starts, where you do your appraisals. Now, as part of the appraisal process, it becomes such a strengthening tool, so to speak, that you actually have evidence of how well the employee is actually performing in their job. Now, as I said, it becomes a verification tool, but also a training tool because you can use that for new employees and say to them, this is how the job's done. Here's one of our star performers, how he actually performs his job, right? But the actual telling point of this is, and this is where you get accelerating continuous improvement, high achievers within your workforce. You look at that and say, okay, so Joe or Mary, where is your next step? Where do you think you can next go in our company? Would you like to step up to become a senior manager, or do you want to step sideways and do something slightly different but more exciting?
Mhm.
And this all comes about by running appraisals within the appraisal process, having the skills and task verification process clearly there for you both to see, right? But going back to the important point I just mentioned, make it a 360 degree. Because I
Uh-huh.
remember when I was in the gas industry and we were going through heaps of changes, and I challenged myself and challenged the employee, be prepared to tell me how I'm performing. And it was interesting. There was one occasion where they said, Ian, at the moment, we're finding you very difficult to contact and actually sit down with you in your office. And it was at a time where we were going through a full refurbishment of the yard. And it was interesting because the person that raised the question wasn't just asking the question, he had a solution for me, right?
Okay.
And it was brilliant. It
Mm.
opened me right up and said, wow, why didn't I think of that? Right. Well, I thanked them profusely. Right. I brought my team of five or six all together, spoke to them, and they said, thank goodness you're back. Okay. And,
Yeah.
but that's where a team works at its strongest. As we've discussed before, you all got to row at the same pace. You've all got to be in this together. And it
Mhm.
can't be just a matter of he or she, them or us. We've got to be in this together.
Yeah. And I like that idea of turning reflection into a development pathway because a SWOT analysis, as my former boss would say, shouldn't just sit on a piece of paper. It should guide how someone builds their skills with a team, capability, and long term professional growth. So now let's zoom out for a moment, Ian, and look at the organizational side. How should companies support their people in this process, especially when it comes to skills and task verification, people development, and engagement, so that competence management becomes part of the organization's culture and duty of care?
Yeah, so this is a brilliant question. And to answer it properly, I'm going to actually split it into two parts.
Uh-huh.
Now, firstly, for a company or an organisation to support this process, they themselves should implement and review regularly their own SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And look, in this troubled world, how important is this now? And, even with the last two businesses I've been talking about, I've been saying, well, how are you protected for fuel supply? Now, one of them, well, actually, the one I did yesterday, there's not much they can do, right?
Mhm.
But there was another company that I was doing last week that are very well involved in this, and they have their own fuel storage. And I said, so have you already started to implement increasing and keeping that at a fuller rate? And the scary thing was, they said yes, but we're already running into a point where our supplier is saying, no, we can't increase the time we deliver to you because we're having shortages of fuel ourselves, right? Now,
Uh-huh.
that's understood, but at least what I'm trying to demonstrate there is they've already looked at their SWOT analysis, the strengths, weaknesses, and opportunities and threats. Clear
Mhm.
threat is lack of fuel, right, for their vehicles, and they are addressing it as best they can. Well, that's fine. That's all as a person like myself can expect to understand, and you tick that off as a positive outcome, right?
Mhm.
But this is where, like I said, part of this SWOT analysis that a business carries out better understands their people, which are their most important asset, right? And this is where, if you don't actually understand your people through a SWOT analysis and taking into account their own SWOT analysis, you very quickly find that disengagement, as we've been starting to regularly talk about, that engagement of the person with the organisation, that will not happen if there's not an understanding of the person, their people's
Right.
strengths and weaknesses, as well as the people understanding the organisation's strengths and
Mhm.
weaknesses and opportunities and threats. So that's where it becomes a two-way thing.
Yeah.
Now, secondly, there is a common notion that as long as your systems, including your software, are certified and you achieve sustained success, right?
Okay.
Well, this is not actually factually true. In actual fact, systems or software do not operate unless people are capable, skilled,
Mhm.
understand the process, understand chain of responsibility, duty of care, rule of law, and above all, their own opportunities and goals in life, right?
Mhm.
That will not be achieved.
Right.
So this is what I've tried to, and I'm going to concentrate a lot on our future episodes, is the importance of people when we talk about systems.
Yeah.
And we can start to now go back and talk about our original discussions in reference to AI. Now, what's
Mhm.
disturbing me at the moment is there's this notion that AI, no, AI will fine, it'll do everything. And I'm saying to them, okay, but who is in charge of AI? And then I asked the simple question of AI, what do you understand by AI? It's artificial intelligence. And I said, well, there's
Mhm.
nothing artificial about people's intelligence.
Mhm.
What we have here is a system that is built on algorithms. Now, unless we properly understand who are putting those algorithms together,
Yeah.
who are actually being trained, and are they capable and skilled?
Mhm.
Are they being ongoing reviewed for oversight? Right? Unless that actually then comes into the discussion point, we're never really going to get a true understanding of the ramifications of this. And to me, this is where it becomes a little bit scary, where people are simply saying, oh no, the system will run itself. Systems do not
Yeah.
run themselves. Systems are based on people.
Mhm.
They're formulated by people and runs on capability, but above all, key to this is cognitive and strategic thinking
Thinking. Mm-hmm.
has to remain in this process.
Mm-hmm. I completely agree. And that would be a really interesting discussion in the future, Ian. Thank you for sharing and breaking this into two. Because when organizations start to treat people capability as this strategic asset, it changes the entire workplace dynamic from simply managing employees to actually developing professionals. So, Ian, looking at the bigger picture now, if individuals consistently apply SWOT thinking to their professional development, what long term impact does that have? Not just on personal careers, but on culture, value creation, organizational capability, and sustainable performance across industries.
I can hear our viewers jumping out of their seats and saying now, happy and engaged employees wanting to become high achievers and simply are people focused. And that's what
Yeah.
all this is about.
Mm-hmm.
And look, many organisations understand this. Once they start to get employee churn, where employees are leaving, they don't feel valued, or they want to go and achieve something else, uh, it brings into the mix a it's not a distrust, but a lack of uncertainty. And this is where that has to be stopped. We have to end up in a position where we always have a people focused, and uh, that's where we get our accelerating continuous improvement and continuous professional development. But above
Mm-hmm.
all, this is where we get people engagement. Because if we don't have that engagement, ultimately it will fall apart, right?
Mm-hmm.
And again, so we go back to what we've spoken about and we talk about understanding the person themselves. And to understand the person themselves, you've got to understand their personal disciplines. Okay. Are they willing and wanting to learn? Okay. And I'll give you another example of this. Actually, we talked about this as well yesterday in reference to toolbox meetings, end of day um, catch ups to see how the day's gone, preparing for
Mm-hmm.
the next day. And one of the challenge I did yesterday was, okay, so who runs these meetings? Oh, it's always the senior supervisor. And, they hold them daily, hold them on a Friday, hold them on a Monday when they start after the weekend. And I gave them an example where I did a very large organisation. And again, it was only the senior supervisor. And I said, okay, you ever thought about asking others to actually run the meeting?
Mm-hmm.
Now, not everyone's going to not want to do that, right? Some people don't want to stand up in front and be able to talk and things like that. But there are many people that are willing to do that.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so this was a 3 or 4 day audit. So the second day I've gone in on the Tuesday, and the managing director said, Ian, come on, you're going to sit in and see how this meeting goes. And it was someone new, it was one of the employees stood up and announced that he was going to run the meeting, right? And he took everyone back to what happened, what's a highlight for himself, his wife, and their family on the weekend. And it was amazing just to look around and see the demeanour of everyone change. All of a sudden, people were energized, okay? And
Uh-huh.
yes, they discussed the normal topics, but the whole demeanour of the whole meeting has changed, right? And to this day, and it's a very big organisation, they religiously carry this out where different people are appointed to actually run the meetings, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it gives, again, we go back to talk about that engagement, right? And it's oh so important. Now, just following on from that, again, what we've already started to realise is yes, okay, we've got to have a personal SWOT analysis, but we also need to have that run on an organisational basis. And
Mm-hmm.
that's what we will discuss upon my return. Now,
Yes.
we won't be able to do it next week. Supposedly, they're rerouting our flight from Sydney to Doha. We may actually be going to fly all the way across to the States and then back over to the UK and
Yeah.
eventually land in Prague. But
Mm.
at this stage, I still don't know. And
Let's see.
but hopefully we'll know in the next 24 hours. But
Mm-hmm.
our next session will be on the organisation SWOT analysis and the importance of how that not only marries in to their own employee SWOT analysis, but it also marries in to the pest analysis as well to give
Yeah.
you that overarching, true understanding of your people, their capabilities, and again, above all, their opportunities for them to improve and become even higher achievers.
Mhm. Well, I hope everything gets certain on your end in terms of your your travel, and I hope everything settles down in the Middle East. And going back to what you were telling us, the story you were telling us, it really highlights the ripple effect, doesn't it? When we improve our skills, our principles, and our professional values, the organization becomes stronger, and that ultimately supports sustainability, responsibility, and long term excellence. Professional growth indeed comes from self awareness, honest self assessment, and a commitment to continuous learning. So, thank you so much again, Ian, for sharing your knowledge, for joining us here on X Rays. Your insights on our topic today really help people see that building competence is a lifelong journey. Thank you so much, Ian.
No, and again, thank you to yourself, Miles. You've done a lot of research into this. I can see that, and and again, that challenges myself to actually, look deep into this. And like I said, one of the strengths I have, I guess, is I can look back over many years of working with organisations where, as I often do, give clear indications of what has happened in the past and things like this. And again, I invite all our viewers to have a look at our podcast on our website and on X-Ray's website and follow the links because we have lots and lots of resources out there for everyone to use. And clearly on this topic, it's like a chain of responsibility, chain of reaction. There's a whole chain of different processes and resources available. And
Uh-huh.
all they have to do is go onto our website, click on the link, have a look at it. They then can copy and paste that into their browsers and go from there. We're happy to share. And obviously, as you are, open yourself up to people asking questions. I'm happy for them to ask you questions. I'm happy for me to come back and ask questions as well, either
Mm-hmm.
on X-Rays or ACI Global's website, and we will look after them as best we can.
Mm-hmm. And our audience can also send me their questions for you, if ever.
Oh yes,
So
no,
we
no,
can
no,
discuss it.
and that would be a
Yes.
real challenge, wouldn't it? Now,
Uh-huh.
get our
That would
viewers
be,
to pose a question, and
yes.
I know we still have a little bit of time up our sleeve,
Yeah.
and it brings me to mind of one of our TV programs where the presenter has on her show a word wizard, and
Okay.
people write in and ask, "What does this word mean?" Okay, and some of the words that come out, and things like that. Even the word ad hoc. Where did ad hoc actually come from?
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And the word wizard takes them back over history and shows,
Yeah.
oh yes, that's come from the UK and it was mentioned in such and such a things like that, and things like that. So yeah, that would be a real challenge. And
Mm-hmm.
look,
And
let's invite our viewers.
yes, that would
Be
be,
prepared to contact X-Rays
mm-hmm.
and contact yourself personally. And
Yes.
this is what I want you to ask Urko at the
Uh-huh.
next meeting. Yeah,
Yes,
that would
and
be
that will
brilliant.
make our conversation more interesting, I'm sure, more engaging.
Yes, no, totally
Okay.
agree.
Well, thank you so much again, Ian. I hope you folks continue this conversation with Ian to learn more on how personal SWOT analysis, CPD, and ISO personal certification can really support your professional journey. It's so easy to connect with them, so we're dropping all the necessary links below for you to check out. Thank you, as always, for tuning in and for letting me bring you thoughtful discussions like this one. Subscribe to X Rays and follow us on Spotify and Amazon Music so you never miss the next insightful conversation. This has been your host, Miles, with Ian, reminding you to stay focused, driven, and inspired with X Rays.